My name is Joy Wiener. I'm Director of Education and Public Programs. And it is our pleasure to be able to plan activities such as this to highlight the artwork of our biennial artists this year. And we have really an incredible group of artists. And we really appreciate the fact that they too are interested in sharing their ideas and their practices and their artwork with us. And it's a wonderful treat to be able to get behind the scenes and learn the inner workings of our biennial artists. So for today, we will be visiting the artists Thomas Germano and Danielle Livoti. And Thomas has a studio in East Norwich, right here. Nearby. And he is a painter, college art professor, an art researcher, and a public art lecturer. He has studied art and art history and continues to integrate both disciplines into his professional work while traveling, drawing in plein air, and creating art in familiar experiential places where he finds his inspiration. Danielle has her studio in her home in Brightwaters, New York. She is an art educator of 13 years at New Hyde Park Memorial High School. She has an MA in studio art from NYU. She loves to explore the interconnectivity of shared emotions, memories, and emotions through abstract mixed media artwork. If she had to describe her artwork in 3 words or less, she would say that it is process-based, journalistic, and abstract. So we have 2 very different artists who will be sharing with us today. And we're going to begin with Thomas. But before we do that, I would like to introduce Christina Schaaf, the Director of Visitor Experience at the museum. And she will give us all the important tips that we need to have a successful Zoom.
Okay, so hi everyone, welcome. I'm so glad all of you could join us today for this program. So just a couple things so everyone knows what to expect. Each tour, with each artist, will be approximately 20 minutes or so long. And we really envision this as a conversation and not a lecture, so please don't hesitate to chime in with any questions that may arise as we're exploring each artist's space. Joy and I will be interjecting with questions throughout to keep that conversation going. So if you do have a question at any point, please just unmute your mic and chime in. Don't hesitate. If it's more comfortable also, you can type questions into the chat. I'll be having a look at that throughout as well. And then also we will be taking about a 5-minute intermission, a little break in between each tour, just to give ourselves a moment to step away from our screens if needed. And we do recommend, if you're not in speaker view right now yet, try to switch to speaker view in Zoom, because it'll make it easier to have a nice big view of each artist as we're in their space. Okay. With all of that said, does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, so then we're gonna dive right in. So we'll beginning with the tour of Thomas Germano's studio. So imagine you're traveling to East Norwich. There is no traffic. And I'm going to mute myself now and switch to you, Thomas, okay?
Welcome. It's a pleasure to be a participant with the Heckscher Long Island Biennial. I want to thank everybody on the staff of the Heckscher Museum. They've all been a pleasure to work with, from the staff that you've met today to the curator and the jurors. Really been a very positive experience. So today I'd like to walk you through my studio. I'm going to talk a little bit about my working methodology, some of the works that are literally on the easel, works that I'm engaged in presently, some works that I've done since the beginning of the pandemic, which I think for most artists, I can't speak for all, but most of us have been very prolific during the last 7 months since the lockdown. And for obvious reasons, this has been a wonderful, productive time, very tense and very anxious time, but also very prolific in terms of getting a lot of new studio projects done. So before we focus on the work on the easel behind me, I'm going to give you a virtual 360. So we'll start in the front of the studio, and I'll kind of give you a walk around of what's happening. These are some works in progress that I've got. A large 60 square inch painting of an outer borough, New York City scene. Another outer borough, Brooklyn, underneath the Manhattan Bridge overpass, which is a work in progress. One of my philosophies about being an artist is always having wet paint on the palette so that I can walk into the studio and start painting within a moment's time. Also very important is to have paint stocked and never to run out in the middle of a inspired moment. Some framed work, and if you see a framed work in the studio today, that means it's finished. All of the other works are works in progress, and I usually work on about 24 to 30 paintings at a time. The work on the easel I'll talk about in a moment, some works in the corner, and all recent works, a framed still life on the bottom, which we'll get to in a moment. Some works from Brooklyn, works from Long Island, and we'll talk about the Italy series, as you'll see a painting just in front of me of Florence. And I'll talk about my Patterson Silk Strike project, which was also done this year in 2020. That's the painting on the floor and a number of watercolors above it, which we'll get to in a moment. The works on the top were student demos. And lastly, these are some Zoom drawings done from a live model during this pandemic year. So as we look a little bit closer at what's on the easel and what's next to the easel, we'll come right up front here to a few works that explain my working process. So the three paintings here are done in my Long Island studio. And being an artist in East Norwich, it's far from the motif that I might be thinking about at the time. So Italy has been on my mind, and in a sense, it's my other studio. I work virtually in Italy. I take a portable easel, which is this object here. It's called the French easel, and I pack this into a suitcase, and it's very portable, and I take this to Italy with me almost every year. I'm lucky enough to teach in Italy, and I'll bring painting supplies with me there. And in order to be as compact as possible, I'll bring a piece of canvas. I brought about 24 of these on my last expedition, and I've gessoed the front of each one, and then I tape the gessoed canvas to a piece of masonite so that it has a hard, firm background. And probably the most prolific summer that I had was the 3 weeks in Italy, where I started off in the north in Venice. I went down to Rome and then to Lucca, where I painted about 24 paintings within 3 weeks. So I averaged almost 3 paintings a day. Those were all started on location, and these were started on the canvas, pre-primed here in New York, taped to the masonite, and then when I get back, I mount it to another piece of masonite, and this is framed, so this is finished. This was from a couple of summers ago, and that's how I work en plein air, or directly on location. The paintings behind me, though, are a little bit different because those are studio inventions, and I've painted on location often enough that these just come out of memories and experiences, and standing in a train station like the painting on the bottom allows me to take in the site and remember what things look like. I'll do a quick sketch in my drawing pad, and when I come back to New York, I've got quite a bit of drawing material and painting material that I can then develop into a painting. The one in the center was based on my waiting around for a concert to start in San Quirico, also in Tuscany, and waiting for this concert to start. There was a little time before the event, so I went out to the road, drew these beautiful pine trees, these Tuscan pines, and a country house in the background, and the sun was starting to set, so it impressed upon me, but I didn't paint it until long after the fact. I did a quick sketch. It maybe took 20 minutes. When I came back to the studio later that year, that's when the painting developed. And I have no idea where the painting on the very top was developed. Yes, Joy?
interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
Do you also do a lot of photographing while you are there, or do you really always work strictly from the in plein air sketches that you do?
I prefer not to take too many photographs. I take photo references, but I leave the photographs out of the creative process because it tends to be a bit too static, and a mechanical eye records something completely different than the mind's eye. So I try to rely more on my own experiences and my memory, and then I'll recreate them here in the studio. But photographs can be troublesome in the way that I work. Not that I'm against working from a photographic image, but they're already flat and they're somewhat stuck in time. Whereas I want these to be more about an edited process of what's the important memory from that experience.
Thank you.
Now, let's go on
One of
the
the
top,
questions on this, I'm sorry, just
Go ahead.
you're speaking about Italy specifically, and I know you have indicated that traveling is something you very much enjoy. Are there other locations that you have visited that equally inspire you, or is there a reason particularly why you feel that you've been attracted to Italy?
Well, Italy has so much art, so much culture, so much beauty, and it's an inspiring place to be. But Mexico has been a recent place of interest to me. And one of the paintings in the biennial is of Mexico City, which I've been going back to for 10 years now. Italy, I've been going to for about 34 years, almost once a year. But I've always refrained from going to Mexico because I felt it was dangerous. I wasn't too certain about where to go. But in 2010, I got the courage up and I thought, all right, I'm going to see this place because it's such an amazing place and it's so close to New York. So for New Year's 2010, I went down to Mexico City. I went out to Teotihuacan, and I absolutely fell in love with the country. And I've been going back several times since the first visit. And I was fortunate enough to get 2 NEH grants, the National Endowments for the Humanities, which sponsored my studying of Aztec and Maya culture throughout Mexico. So that was a real treat. While I was there studying the culture, I was also doing a lot of drawing. And the painting that's in the biennial of Mexico City's cathedral, which I call Tenochtitlan, is the ancient name for Mexico City before the conquest. It's a hotel room view that I had stayed in 3 separate times. And each time I went back to create more imagery and build on the imagery. But it started with drawings, it developed into a painting, and that painting in the biennial wasn't finished until the pandemic. Again, another prolific period that just gives us such a boost of creative time in the studio because there's not a whole lot of other things going on. No wasted time to go traveling or all the wonderful concerts that I love to see also. So that one was started in my mind 10 years ago, but not finished until this year. And you'll see, as you'll notice, a lot of unfinished paintings in the studio. The paintings get started and then they're works in progress. I'll put them aside and I'll work on sometimes 24 to 30 paintings at one time. So the last painting on the top is a place that I have no idea where that is. I gave it a name of a random location, but it's a composite of all of my experiences in Italy. I knew there had to be a house. I knew there had to be farmland in the back. I love the division of the farm fields in the background and the pine tree that is on the property of every farm in Italy. So it's a place that was inspired by my experiences, but it's not a real place. And that's how a lot of the paintings here develop. They start from my experiences, my memories, and my drawings, but then they develop into something completely unexpected. So we're going to move on over to the studio, and the painting that's on the studio now is a work in progress, literally. And one of the things that we don't see when we look at artwork in galleries or museums is the works in progress. And I think the studio visit gives us an opportunity to show, well, what's in the oven, what's cooking, what's being produced at the time. So this is a work in progress, and it talks a little bit about how my paintings develop. It started with a sketch. I went to North London a few years ago to visit a friend. And this is something I've been working on since the pandemic. I pulled out that old drawing and I wanted to develop this subject. It's the North London neighborhood of George Orwell. In fact, George Orwell lived in the house here. And being in Orwellian times, I thought, well, yeah, it's time to revisit this and to get into the mindset of flying drones that are developing here, camera surveillance, and some things that are starting to change the way that privacy is considered in the 21st century. So it's a work in progress, and George Orwell has such a psychological element to his political writings, 1984, Animal Farm, etc. So this and so many of my works are about psychological spaces, and using composition, light, and color, I try to direct the viewer through the space to ask the question, what's around this wall? What happens where the light source comes from? Or where do these shadows lead to? So coming around a corner, we don't really see that, or down the street, we don't really see what's in the background there, but I try to create these invitations to think about what's going on in these dark or light-filled spaces. That's the psychology of the space, as I call it. So it's a work in progress. It still has a way to go. I'd say it's about 60% there, and I don't know what a painting is going to look like until it's completely finished. The last brushstroke is the completion of the painting, and then I frame it and I get it out of the studio, because anything that's still in the studio is fair game for being repainted. And I try not to do that too much because I would never finish anything. It reminds me of a quote by Leonardo da Vinci. He would say, a painting is never finished, it's just abandoned. So I have that problem too. So these are a few works in progress. From a trip in December to Los Angeles's Venice Beach, California. Nothing is better than going to a warm climate in the coldest part of the year. So this was from a rather vacant beach far away from the populated part of Muscle Beach and what you might know about Venice Beach, California in Los Angeles. I was out there for a short visit to visit a friend and also to see the Manet exhibition at the Getty Center and take in a musical concert, all of my favorite things. So this was from the day, it was 36 hours in Los Angeles, real quick trip in and out. But the day that I was flying home, we went down to the beach and I stopped what I was doing, took out my sketchbook, which I carry everywhere I go, and I drew this lifeguard house. I just thought it was fantastic the way it was set in front of the water and the mountains, and the paint job was pretty cool too. So that's from Venice Beach, California. Again, it's a work in progress. It's probably 40% there. It's just a start. And where it goes from what you see today is to be decided. And that's part of the creative process. I don't have a planned finished look before I start, and I certainly don't know what it's going to look like until I get there. And that's the excitement of the creative process. That's what I love so much about painting. It's not knowing what happens next. It's the mystery, it's the possibility, the potential for a painting that starts with something and then I'll completely obliterate it with a glaze and ghost out the image and just have a shape that I'll then try to work back into the image once again. So the creative process is an enjoyable one, and it's kept my interest for decades now. So a few other recent works.
Can I just ask, you said you're working on 24 pieces or so?
Yeah, about 24. As we spin around the studio, they're all facing out or facing in, but those are works in progress that I keep active. For me, it's very easy to start a painting, but finishing a painting is the hardest part because I don't know where it's going until I get there.
I'm just curious because that, to me, that sounds like a lot of paintings to be simultaneously working on. Have you always worked on so many pieces at one time, or is this something you sort of discovered over time that it's better to take a break and switch gears?
I find that working in series helps when you have a lot of things going on at once. And then what you do in one, you want to do better in the next one. So having multiple paintings for me, and also multiple subjects, allows me to always be working. I don't have to wait for the light to come back or the season to come back or that next trip to Mexico City to finish the painting. I started the Mexico City painting that's in the biennial And then I needed information, and I couldn't continue until I went back to Mexico City and saw it, experienced it once again, and then I went back into the painting. And I thought this year I would go back to Mexico City one more time to get that final burst of inspiration that I needed to finish it. But then the pandemic struck, and I said, I'm going to finish it without going back. And that's where memory and experience take over. And the literal, which you just have to take off the table, you start to develop your own inventive language of how you want things to go. So the light and the color is 100% invented. I do have architectural references in front of me, which I can't read.
Oh my goodness.
The cathedral. But what I can do is to invent a new sky, a different color, a different way that the light passes through the space. But those are all 100% studio inventions. Okay, based on memory, based on experiences. So the framed works are finished works. And this was one that I did of sunflowers that I like to grow in my yard here, and a Zapotec carpet, which I picked up in Mexico. And I just thought that this ancient culture of weaving and the use of color and design was an incredible art form that has been too long overlooked. And there have been a number of people who recognize the beauty and the genius of weavers from Central America and Mexico, like Annie Albers, and she dragged her husband, Joseph Albers, who was a big influence on my education. Going to Yale, I had this obsession with squares and color theory. So it's something that comes into my work often. But the Zapotec carpets is something that I started to incorporate with these still lifes, and I have a number of them. This is finished as it was exhibited last summer in an exhibition. This one is a work in progress, and it's about, maybe 80% there. Another Zapotec carpet and sunflowers. And the last of these still lives that I'll show you is from my own garden, tiger lilies, which you probably see all over Long Island. The fence, and then a simplification. The neighbor's house and yard is not visible, but it would be through these negative spaces that punctuate and complement the color of the tiger lily itself. And one last painting from this corner of the studio is just finished, and I finished this one maybe 10 days ago. It's a view from a friend's balcony in Seacliff, overlooking the Hempstead Harbor. So it's a small painting. And I spoke the other night during the virtual panel with the Heckscher about squares. And you'll notice that a lot of my paintings are 12 by 12 or 24 by 24. Two of the three works that I have in the exhibition at the Heckscher right now are square formats. And that's something that comes out of the antithetical expected size for landscape painting. So oftentimes you have landscapes that are always wider than they are tall. I wanted to have a greater challenge and use a compositional format that you don't associate with landscapes very often. So it was wide, the same width as height, and squares offer a challenge for not only the format, but also it forces the formal geometry in the architectural elements and allows me to be a lot more inventive with the skies and the inventiveness of the color, light, and what happens on the top part. Okay, we're going to come around now and see the rest of this corner. Up above, there's a painting of Luca that was done in my studio here on Long Island. That's one of the larger ones, 32 by 40 inches, but it was preceded by a plein air sketch on location. And then from that sketch, I worked up the larger painting that you see there. A few paintings in the corner. One on the left is Madrid, then Richmond, London. And this is another one of the motifs that I paint frequently. As you'll see, the large painting in the center here. That's Brooklyn. That's Dumbo, where I had a studio for 18 years. and the 18 years that I spent there haven't ended. It's something that still creeps into my subject matter and my imagery. Through my subconscious, I'm still walking through the streets in my dreams. And again, that psychological space that's directed through composition, light, and color is something that I think a lot about. And this was done within the last 3 years. That's Dumbo, Brooklyn. That's an acronym for Down Under Manhattan Bridge Overpass. Next to it, this one here is another painting of Florence, Italy, and having the great fortune of teaching in Florence, Italy frequently. I go there about once a year. Everybody knows the Duomo and the main architectural landmarks, but this is probably the place that I spent the most amount of time, the Uffizi Gallery and the porch of the Uffizi, looking at the Palazzo Vecchio on the right and the Duomo and the Campanile in the center of that composition. We're going to come over here now and take a look at the watercolors, which are set up on this table. And this is all from the project that I did related to the Patterson Silk Strike. Now, there are 2 paintings on their oil on canvas. That's Patterson Silk Strike from 1913. That became the subject for a book commission that I did with the American Labor Museum earlier this year. And these are about 18 separate paintings that tell the story about the Patterson Silk Strike of that year, 1913. So that's the Botto House on the left, with the workers coming to hear some of the strike organizers. And they had some incredible people address the workers, including Sinclair Lewis and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, and a number of labor organizers in the early 20th century. They met in Haledon, and that house today is the American Labor Museum house. So the book illustrations also follow my fascination with the square. That painting was a double square, and this is a double square, so it's going to be a 2-page fold out, and that's the Doherty Mill, where a lot of the strikers worked. In fact, that was the center of the strike in 1913. I had to research some of the strikers' machinery and what they were working on. Patterson was the center of the Industrial Revolution in the 1900s. It was a place that was designated by Alexander Hamilton, who recognized that the falls were a great source of energy. And then the machinery ran on that electrical power that was generated from the Passaic Falls next to the mills. So these are some of the machines, and there was quite a bit of research, which I love to do preceding the work. The works are all watercolor, with the exception of 2 oil paintings on canvas. And the first go around with the machines was rejected by my collaborators. The collaborators included a historian, a storyteller, the director, and the head of education at the museum. They said, that's not the right machine. It wasn't that type, but it was this type. So I had to redo this one. This is the new one. The original one appeared prior to that, and I'll get to that in a moment. These are the strikers in the streets who are taking their cause to the streets. Eventually, some of them will be harassed, arrested, and all sorts of problems. Those are some of the silk looms that I painted at first on the left side, and I was told, no, that's not the right one. You got to do the other ones. So this is one of the double squares, which I intended as the fold out, but working with historians and museum directors who know about this stuff. We're going to use the right half of this illustration, and the left half gets cropped. So you won't see that one, but only during a virtual tour you get to see that.
Can I ask you, just thinking about this project in comparison to your other work you've been discussing, this being historical documentation, was that challenging for you in the sense that now you can't be focusing as much on memory and sort of letting it go in whatever direction it takes you, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's a different type of project, but I didn't find it stymieing or in any way limiting of what I do in terms of research. I'm always attracted to a historical story, subject, or place. Dumbo, Brooklyn is very historic. The house that I'm in right now is very historic. Everything, just about everything I do has some history, and I think it's through the history, memory, and experience that I find my greatest influences. So I found it a very inspiring project to work on, different from what I would do just coming into the studio and picking up a brush and painting. This is sending the children away during the strike because they couldn't afford to keep the children, as the strikers were not earning a living.
I
Uh,
I also wanted to ask, these are the first works of art that you have shown that have people in them. I notice all of your landscapes and cityscapes don't contain uh, any individuals. How is that, I guess, different, or has this experience of adding people given you any thoughts as to whether you might do that in any of your other paintings?
well, I've incorporated human elements frequently in my work. You haven't seen those in the landscape, where I like to empty the spaces of any human presence. But my work over the trajectory of about 35 years has been heavily figurative, and I'll get to that last area of the Zoom drawings that I'm working with the live model, which is all about working with the figure. But I've been working figuratively on and off. They're different, where there's more of a human presence and historical role for these humans. Uh, and then you'll see empty landscapes, which are more psychological spaces. But what I didn't show you today is an entire series of mythopoetic paintings, which are from some of my earlier paintings, and labor subjects that date to the 90s, and my graduate work, which was heavily figurative. And what I'm doing now in the Zoom drawings, it's all about drawing the figure, sometimes 3.5, 4 hours at a time. So the last one from this series was the best thing about the strike, the children going back to school. And that was one of the takeaways, that children were no longer allowed to work in factories at the age of 8, 9, 10. And after the strike, they were able to go to school again. So the last part that I'll show you, and then we're going to turn it over to the next part, are the Zoom drawings, which I've been engaged in since the beginning of the pandemic. And come a little closer to these. The one on the top shows myself in a mask. I think you can see that one right up here, the self-portrait. And some of the other ones are done directly from the live model, a Zoom model, which is about the only safe way to work today without working with masked artists and masked models. And this is the condition that we've been subjected to, I guess, for the time being. So these are works that I do about, on average, 3.5 hours a week. And this week was a little bit more productive, as Halloween was around and the model wanted to wear some costumes. So there's a number of drawings that are done directly from the live model. And this is something which I have not been able to do. At the college, I teach figure drawing, and I do a great deal of drawing the figure from the model while I'm teaching, but things have changed since the pandemic, and I'm very happy to get back into drawing the live model in this unique way, which I never thought would have been possible before this time. So we could turn things over to questions or move on from there. But that's a panorama of some works in progress. And Christina, that corner is filled with about 24 works in progress. Well, we'll leave it at that shot. So,
That's great. Thank you so much, Thomas. This was phenomenal. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions for Thomas? Anything? Joy, did you have another? I know we had some other additional questions.
I I just think it was a lovely visit, and I've heard your lectures so much, Thomas, and enjoyed them very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. I do have that clip, that video, if there's time to see it, or if you want
Oh
to.
yes, it's relatively short, right, Thomas? Why don't we play that quickly?
6 seconds.
Okay, I think we can do that.
Okay. So this is a working process of how I go about from start to finish. And I have to, let's see if I can get to that. Is the share privileges permitted? Okay. Okay, we'll see if this works.
Yep, we can all see it. Should be good.
You can see the easel?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll start. It's pretty quick, and this is way that I set up a painting. Okay, so from start to finish, that's the same painting that I'm holding. And this is a teaching demo that I just did last month to demonstrate the same exact way that I go about making a painting from start to finish, darks to lights, blocking out major areas and making decisions early on, not getting wrapped up in any details, but that's how I would work with a plein air painting. That's how I work with everything around me here. And that's pretty much my working method. Which I share with my students, and I try to practice what I preach with my students. So thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Great.
Can
Thank
I ask
so much.
one question?
Yes?
You work dark to light, is that in oil? When you're working in watercolor, is it light to dark or dark to light?
Watercolors would be light to dark, but with oil, which that was a demonstration of oil, I always block things out going from dark to light and trying to maintain those shadows from a very early state. Lights and darks are very important to me. And the shadows and the color are very important to me. So the color gets tweaked along the process, but the shadows start off the painting, and I try not to lose that at any point during the painting.
Thank you.
Watercolor would be the reverse process though, yeah.
Right.
Great. Okay.
Any other questions?
Anything else? Okay. Well, I want to thank you again, Thomas. This was fabulous. I really appreciate the tour. And the time, everyone, is actually exactly 1:45 on my clock. So maybe we'll take our 5-minute break now. And then we will regroup at 1:50 and begin our tour of Danielle Livoti studio.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
So Danielle, we have now traveled to you in bright waters. So thank you so much for joining us today and take us on a tour through your space.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So first off, I wanted to say thank you. Being in this exhibit is truly an honor. It is the first time that I'm exhibiting in the biennial. The 2 pieces that I have in the show were both created this year in 2020. So to kind of piggyback on what Thomas discussed in his lecture, it definitely has been a very prolific period of time for artists and me personally. Being able to create work, it just keeps turning out stuff. I think there's just a lot to work with right now. So I'm going to be taking you on a tour of my home studio, which I feel really fortunate to have. I've always worked out of my home in random spaces. Prior to moving here to Brightwaters, I was living in Belmore in a 1-bedroom condo, and I would make artwork and put it up in my kitchen on the walls, and just wherever I could try to do something, I would. I am an art teacher, and that takes up a lot of time. And the first beginning part of teaching, I really just did not make a lot of personal work at all. So it's a nice change for me now to have a space that has a lot of different little workable areas, and that I can easily come to at any point and be able to start working. So I'm going to start with a little panoramic of the room. I will be talking about my materials and process, my routine, and how being in this studio space impacts the work. So I'm going to start with that. You'll see some work behind me right here. These are pieces that are on wood panels. These are about 24 by 24 inches. These are finished pieces that I hung up. I like to have some finished works around me in the studio to bounce off of when I'm creating new pieces. So these stay up and get interchanged out as needed if something's going into an art show, or if maybe somebody wants to purchase something, that kind of a thing. So let me flip the camera really quick. So right here, we have the main workspace, which is my desk. We have a finished artwork hanging above it. This is from the same series of work that's in the biennial, which was all created during quarantine and inspired by different emotions and memories and things I was going through during quarantine that just really needed to get out onto a canvas. So I'll try to bring you a little bit closer to that in a moment. I keep a lot of things out and ready to work with. One of the benefits of working from home is that I can have stuff everywhere and come in here, and when the moment strikes, I can begin working and get stuff out onto paper or canvas or wood panels, whatever I'm working on. This area here is just some organizational stuff. I like to, like I said, keep things out and about so I can just reach for something, grab it, work with it, and then it can hopefully end up back where it belongs. These pieces over here, I'll talk about a little bit later on, but these are little mixed media works on paper that are part of a series I'm doing recently. It's an art a day type of challenge that I've self-imposed. So we'll get to those in a little bit. And then as we turn around, this is very, very brand new. This is a 48 by 48 inch canvas that I purchased this weekend because I was going through quite a bit of a personal life issue and really felt the need to start something. So I'll tell you all about that in a little while as well. And then this space here is just some storage, again, access to having materials out and ready to go. I try not to keep too many things tucked away that I'd have to rummage for stuff. And then I have a little gallery wall of some things that are inspirational to me. I love tattoo art and I love illustration work, even though that's not really the style that I personally work in. But I do like to have it around, and I keep some works that students have given me up as well, because I always find that really inspiring to have up and looking at and seeing what they wanted to share with me or what they wanted to allow me to keep of theirs. And then these are the 4 works that I mentioned earlier. You can see from a different view here. Okay, so I'm gonna bring it back to this space for a moment. We'll kind of start here. So I already talked about how the space is conducive to my process because I do like to have things ready to go nearby, ready to work with. So my routine with things is that I don't really work for hours in a studio space. That doesn't really work for me. I prefer to set up little constraints, I guess we'll call it, where I decide to just work on something for maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So the process here that you're seeing, the papers that are all over the place, this is part of my art a day challenge that I'm working on. So every day since, it's been about, we're 20 days into this, something called the Mercury retrograde. If you follow astrology at all, astrology has been very interesting to me because I like to deal with work that's deals with interconnectivity of people and how we're all connected through these different shared experiences. So I've taken it upon myself during this particular time in astrology when things tend to get a little chaotic, things are unsettled, emotions are heightened, there's miscommunications, also coinciding with a very tumultuous election year and just a lot of world events and personal events that are going on. I decided I'm going to make an artwork every day during this time period. So I set up my work on just watercolor papers. So these are about 7.5 by 11 inches. And I will start with writing. I use a lot of watercolor pencils or colored pencils or chalk-based things. And I will kind of write and then wipe away and water it down, get rid of it, remove things. Some pieces I will add collage to, or like this piece has a little bit of collage. And I'll work with things directly wet on wet. I use a little heat gun, which I have over here, to dry things and produce different effects while I'm working, so that way I can work faster. And I'll set a timer for myself and decide, as I sit down, okay, I'm gonna just time myself 15 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever happens in that time, I'm leaving it. So these works are all really based on what was I thinking, what was I feeling, what was happening in the world that particular day. I like to write directly on the wet surfaces, so it's kind of a sgraffito, if I'm saying it pronouncing it correctly, kind of an effect that happens. And I build up some textures in here. You can kind of see I like to work with various acrylic mediums. So this has a little bit of what's called like a fiber paste that'll produce this papery, pulpy texture, which I really like. And then sometimes the work, I don't usually want words to be super visible, but lately I've been allowing certain words or phrases to sit on the surface more. Writing to me has always been an important part of my process. I will often start with a journal entry. Every day I write and create journal entries that will get used in the pieces that I'm making as a base layer. This piece up here, which is called Forgive and Forget, was created during quarantine. And the very first layer on this canvas is all pieces of my personal journals. So you can kind of see some of it popping through in some places. I'll let it sit for a day or so, and then I'll start layering over the piece with other mediums, collages, other artifacts that I've collected and found and kept. A lot of the work, I guess, is also about releasing the past as well. And so it becomes a very cathartic process for me to allow myself to part with the words in my journals, to allow myself to part with these very personal little artifacts that I've kept, whether they were, fragments of past relationships, which has definitely been a huge impact on my work. This is, it becomes deeply personal. It's definitely scary to just allow those things to settle onto the canvas and be out there and exposed. So I guess it's when I hide things and I cover things, I'm still working through allowing stuff to really come to the surface. I'm still allowing the work to, I pick and choose what I want people to see about myself, because I also want people to be able to see themselves also in the work in some capacity. So when you experience the work in the biennial in person, if you get the chance to, go to the museum and see it, I really encourage you to look closely, get up close to it, and see what words or things come to the surface for you, and how that might, impact yourself when you're experiencing the work. In terms
Danielle,
of, yes.
yeah. Do you name the pieces when when they're completed, or do you have like an idea about that before you begin?
Yeah, so it's hard. I will sometimes start a work, and then as I'm developing and writing, or pulling things from my environment to work with, something will jump out at me, and that will allow me to be like, okay, I'm going to lock into that phrase now, and it sort of becomes a title. And the titles of the work are definitely important to me, because I do think it gives the viewer a framework to kind of work with and look for clues about in the work. So that is an important piece to me. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
The smaller pieces that
Mhm.
you are showing us, the watercolors, do you go back into those as well, or do they
These
have?
I don't. These I just, they're a one-shot deal. I kind of leave them as is,
Mhm,
and that's it. It's kind of a way for me to say, oh, okay. End of the day, I usually work on these at night, after work,
mhm.
unless there's an opportunity to do something that really needed to happen that day. But it's again kind of like a release for me to just say, okay, I got this out onto this paper, and now it's done, and I'm moving on. So
Do you
these
ever, do these ever become a part of a collage into the larger pieces, or
um
they just exist unto themselves?
so as of right now, they do kind of exist for themselves, I guess. I have in the past though kept things that I do collect and end up tearing or playing with, and incorporating into the other works.
Mhm.
I'm just kind of selective about it, because again, sometimes it's hard for me to completely part with something like this, but I do like to work on top of other old works, which is actually something I can talk about right now for you guys. So this is a process that kind of started for me, in graduate school. I was working on a series of screen prints, and I always had this extra piece of paper that was just laying around that I would use as a, backdrop for whatever I was screen printing, so the ink wouldn't get all over the place. And it started to collect all these different marks from this various screen prints I was working on. And then I came to realize that, like, oh hey, I really like this weird accumulation of these marks that I didn't think about, and it just happened, and it was very just spontaneous. So what I started doing now is I will use a piece of watercolor paper as my palette, almost, and as my space where I, wipe off my brushes or clean off my pencils, or let the pencil shavings accumulate and the paint drips accumulate from whatever I have out for the day. So this right here is like my work in progress, I guess, paint palette for which piece? Where did it go? I hid it. There was this one here. It's on the wall. This is kind of still a work in progress right now, but I have it up for space purposes. But you can kind of see some of the colors and stuff from this piece over here. Sorry if I'm walking too fast, on this palette. So it starts to catch everything. And then while I'm working on the art a day pieces, I also have multiple things happening here, because I might have had an excess of paint on this. So I'll kind of do a little quick mono print, wet on wet, just let stuff wipe off, and that's it. So now these two pieces of paper that have these spontaneous marks on them will become the foundation for the next piece, essentially. So this is another example of having something out and in progress that I'm just not thinking about. I'm just using it as a space to wipe off materials, dust off a brush, start with some collage, get a foundation going. Another piece,
Can I
yes.
just ask one more question? I think Joy and I were looking at some of the different materials you use, and I know you were saying you like to really incorporate mixed media in most of your work. But we noticed your use of encaustic as well as rubbing alcohol. Could you just explain how those media interact with the other media you work with?
Yes. So I like to play with building up of texture, and having these more experimental textures coinciding with each other on a surface. So I will like choose little things that I want to keep out. So I'll work with acrylic, like I said. Like I have some of these alcohol, like ink-based acrylics and the acrylic high flow watercolors. And the way that the rubbing alcohol interacts with the watercolor will allow it to kind of dissolve it, and you get these little free flowing effects that are pretty spontaneous. Then applying heat to that while I'm working with it, I use the heat gun and it moves the watercolor and stuff all around the canvas with the alcohol drying up. And it's just something that I've kind of been experimenting with. And then in these pieces here, this has encaustic incorporated into it in some spaces. And the encaustics create a little bit of a resist for me. It's something else to work off against. It's something else to scratch into. And I like the idea of being able to have the heat element that is also kind of spontaneous. Not, you can't really control it too much, but it allows you to play and continue to allow the encaustic to move a little bit. I kind of like that. So it's just kind of fun for me to play around the surfaces and build up the textures of things. One of my favorite artists that I love to look at is Jose Parla, and he's a street artist. So his paintings look like they're literally pulled off of a concrete wall, and he creates such awesome texture. So I'm always thinking about him when I work. And I think about the artist Cy Twombly a lot as well, due to the writing. Basquiat, stream of consciousness writing and poetry inspires me as well. And then I also like to look at artists like Helen Frankenthaler, Norman Lewis, more like abstract expressionists, painters as well. So the last piece that I will discuss here is this new one. So talking about interconnectivity and shared human experiences, pulling from memories. I have always been somebody who's been sentimental, and I collect and keep things for whatever reason. Sometimes it's good and bad. But one thing that I kept for a long, long time were these notes from high school, from my high school sweetheart. And it has been a tumultuous couple of years because we had been together for a long time, and broke things off. And I have been using the past year as a way to work through all of these feelings that ebb and flow. And that's something that I think obviously so many people experience to some capacity, and how we choose to heal ourselves and what do we do. So I decided it was time to go out. I bought a big canvas. I just wanted something big, bigger than I've worked with, honestly, probably ever. And I thought it was time to take these old love notes and stupid things that we would pass to each other in the halls. And this is now my foundation base layer for this piece. I also have random movie ticket stubs in here that I saved from 10-15 years ago. So this part of the process is usually the hardest part of creating the artwork for myself, because like I said, I'm parting with these pages that I've kept for years, and that reopen a lot of things for myself. And it is scary to have them out on the surface. I don't usually like people to even see this layer at all in its entirety. So you guys are kind of getting a real sneak peek here behind the scenes, because this is the most personal part of the work for me, getting this out. And then as I add to this, the next thing that I might do is start going in with some watercolor pencils. I start writing my own thoughts and feelings out onto this. I will pull my own journal pages, pull writing from that, start to develop it there. And then I love seeing how the collage of pen and ballpoint pen on things like loose leaf paper, how that is affected by things like my acrylic mediums and stuff. So it's cool to see how like certain pens will get really smudgy. The paper will start to get really see-through. And then as I add things and remove things here, I'll heat up the canvas and I'll start tearing away at it. So some of these loose leaf papers will peel away and you'll see almost a reverse image of the writing left behind on the canvas. So that's what's happening like here in this piece. This was heated up with the heat gun, peeled and torn away. And there was still this imprint on this paper texture here that's like kind of left behind. So it's still like a way for me to disguise the real stuff that's going on back there. Cause again, it's very personal, but I want to leave room for people to see themselves in the work. I guess the last thing that I will show you is just in this little area here. These are just some more of the things that I use. I have a very limited amount of art stuff that I use. I am probably like the worst. I don't like to spend a ton of money buying up art supplies. I will keep and buy just like little tiny things. And I think that's also part of the reason why I use things like alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and a lot of water-based things is like letting thin layers of stuff kind of build up. I use a lot of different acrylic mediums from various brands. I keep random like things of sand, colored pieces of glass. And then down in here, these are some of the things that I collect and keep from other artworks that I've torn up and held onto. And I will keep my paper towels that I dry off stuff or stamp up stuff with. And these paper towels, again, have this kind of random spontaneous color that's left behind. And I will peel these apart and utilize them as collage. So it's almost like being able to paint with the colors that were left behind from previous paintings. And then in here is a random collection of more artifacts that I've hoarded away. Book pages, concert tickets, old maps, stuff from my grandmother that she left behind for me, book pages from my mom's old high school textbooks that she left behind. These will be things that I will kind of play a game and just randomly dig in. What do I pull up? Okay, there's something here. I'll kind of read through it, and if there's a word or a phrase that interests me, that might help me either start a piece or add into an existing piece. And then I'll keep little other found artifacts around. Like this was a doily from something my grandmother left behind for me. I don't know how old it is, but I want to use it in some capacity in another piece. So I'll keep that. And then I have just like little drawers of other stuff, memory stuff that I've kept around. And I just keep it nearby. Markers, sometimes I'll play around with and use for writing in the work. More little artifacts and things. So that is pretty much it. I think the only thing I didn't really mention too much was, I guess, other random inspirational things that I will do or listen to. Like when I'm working, I will keep music on. Usually I don't really like to work when it's super quiet. So I'll keep music in the background. That will sometimes impact the flow of the work, how fast or slow I'm working, how energetic and angry the writing looks. Sometimes punk music helps. Sometimes it's more alternative, slower, electronical things that don't have words. Sometimes I'll really rely on some lyrics and pull that also into the work, so I'll tune into it. and podcasts as well. Sometimes keep a podcast going. I like to listen to an astrology podcast. It's called Ghost of a Podcast, and the woman who speaks on that will usually have some insightful things that, you know, kind of click and go, oh, that's what's going on out there right now. So this makes sense. And I'll bring that into the work sometimes too. So yeah, if there's other questions you guys have, I'd be happy to answer anything.
Do you always begin with the pages of type? Is that, or the written word, is that how every piece begins, or sometimes?
Yeah, it usually is. I rarely start with color on a
Uh-huh.
surface, or you know, painting directly onto a surface with a certain color scheme or something like that. I tend to start with the writing process, because the writing process starts for me in that my physical book, or it starts with written things like you could see in the newest piece, the notes that I've collected. So I need to kind of see words and phrases to get something going for myself, and then that's when I'll start, you know, developing and choosing color. And even the color that I work with is it's really based on just what is the feeling of the words. What do I think kind of matches that a little bit? I will look at my surroundings and be inspired by color in my home, in my space, out my windows, or just colors that I see on some of the little collage pieces that I'm using. And I'll pull from there too and start to build up.
Mhm. Do your students, do they want to be inspired and do things similarly to you, or like, do they know about your
They
process?
do, yeah. So I'm really big on sharing my process with them, especially my AP drawing students. Being able to see their teacher as an artist is not just an art educator, but actually, like Thomas said, you know, practicing what you preach and doing the work too. I definitely bring that in. I try to do projects with them that mimic a little bit of a process like this, because it's very new for them and they don't know what to do. It's really like scary for them almost, because they just want to be very representational.
Right.
And I do work representationally sometimes as well. I actually like doing photorealistic charcoal drawings and things like that. So but the work that you're seeing here in this space, this is where I've kind of been trying to cultivate my practice in this realm. So when they see that I'm on social media, I use my Instagram for connecting with my students and sharing my work with everybody. So they follow me, they get to see what I'm making every day, and I do hope it makes them want to pick up their work or sketchbook or do something too.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great. Does anyone have any other questions for Danielle? Any other thoughts or comments? Well, I just want to say I love focusing on relationships as a starting point, because as you said, it's something we all can relate to, right? And it's so personal, and yet the fact that you're burying it in those layers, I just find it fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely one of those topics that, you know, I think artists, musicians, I mean, it's inspired countless centuries worth of work, and it's always interesting to see how different a topic like that that's so common for so many humans, you know, especially now when we're still in this weird isolation space, to see so many different approaches to these topics, and to find these, you know, different little synchronicities that happen amongst people. I think making this work has allowed me to feel more to feel connected, to the whole, to other people that I don't even know yet, but just kind of allows you to find comfort in a way too, other than obviously the work is very therapeutic for me to create in the first place. But it is one of those things where it's just kind of interesting to be like, okay, you know what? I am not the first or last person to go through this. And this is my way of getting it out into the universe. And I love seeing other people's approaches to how they get these things out into the universe for themselves. So
That's great.
I'm also curious, you have the handwritten script lettering that you're writing in yourself, but then you also have, these past journal entries with a similar, but often, a smaller scale because it's a reproduction or the actual authentic page, right?
right.
But then you also have these typeface, other documents you were sharing with us. In terms of just typography, like, have you thought about other ways to integrate text or other fonts, or like thinking about the computer in any way? And these all seem very, and that's what I love about it. It's like you're pulling these authentic documents, not really talking about the digital realm, but you were talking about Instagram and using social media. So just curious your thoughts on text and social media and digital, like, work, and could that integrate in some way into your artwork in the future, or do you like the idea that it's more traditional?
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying with that. So for me right now, like making these pieces, I feel the need to keep it very, I like the tactileness. I like working and being physically connected to the act of writing and feeling, because for me also it's that physical interaction is also another form of release for me. It's like getting this energy out. So working digitally right now is not super on my radar, but I could see myself potentially taking pieces that I've already created, maybe scanning, working with them that way, and then allowing myself to build up other layers while still retaining some of that texture that I like, that I need to see and feel on the surface of these. So, and then in terms of the style of writing and stuff, like I mentioned, the artist Cy Twombly, Basquiat, and seeing graffiti artists and street artists writing. That's always been really interesting to me, because it's really like that you're seeing that artist's hand and that very personal way of making a mark, and our handwriting, having that signature handwriting. I think on some capacity for me too, having the physical pages that I've collected and glued down first, you kind of have a past, present, future thing happening in a way. So being able to physically interact and write onto a wet surface, now I'm able to integrate the present moment and interject that. Whereas I don't know if I was to type out something digitally, if it would have that same impact for me. Yeah.
It's interesting what you say about handwriting too. It is sort of sadly becoming a lost art, right? Because so much is just this text that could be written by anyone.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things where I think for me it would take a little bit of the personality out of it, keeping it personal to some extent.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I just want to thank both artists so much for your time and opening up your spaces and giving us this really unbelievable behind the scenes look at your processes. And Joy, did you want to just share a couple of things with the audience before we wrap up for the day?
I do, and thank you from me as well. It's just so much more meaningful to hear. I mean, it's amazing to just get to look at the works up close and personal, like as we do, because we spend a lot of time in the museum. And really, every time I come in and look at both of your works of art, I mean, you and Thomas's, I see more things than the time from before. But then to hear about it just adds another layer of richness, for me, from both of you, that I just it helps us to understand, and I think that everybody is looking to understand, and capture those feelings. So I thank you. I loved how different you guys were. That's amazing, as well. And I just wanted to also let everybody know that on Thursday, November 19th, Danielle will be part of the panel discussion where our curator will be asking questions and again, just making those interrelations between, each artist's theories and ideas and even connecting. This past week, she did one and, she connected works of art that just were completely didn't look anything alike, completely separate processes. And yet there were these strands and threads that just brought everything together. And she does a great job with that. And Thomas also will be on Friday, November 20th will be in the museum. So you can talk to him in person and, ask more questions about his work. And I know that Paul is out there somewhere, but next Sunday we will be traveling to his studio, Paul Farinacci, Mark Van Wagner, and Luke Mers. And those should also be three super exciting studios to visit. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. We hope you'll continue and sign up again. And thank you all so much. Have a great
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Have a wonderful day. Take care.